Hello, everybody. Thank you for being with us this evening. I'm too glad to have in this space, can say in English, the meetings of Al-Mukhatabat Journal, les rencontres Al-Mukhatabat, or in Arabic, liqa'at Al-Mukhatabat. I'm very glad to invite and to have with us online Gary Kemp. He's from Glasgow University in Scotland. It's very famous, of course, university. And he's also Gary. Sorry, he's very known, of course, about his writings on Quine, philosophy of language, of many topics related to the philosophy of language and of mind and of science. And I'm really very happy to have him this evening. I want just to present him quickly. Of course, he presents some of his main principal works. We have, for example, in 2020, in Bloomsbury Academic, he published a very good book on Quine. Quine's Philosophy and Introduction is a good book that I recommend to everyone that want, of course, to know in an easy way center ideas and thesis of Quine's philosophy. And of course, he has a very good book about philosophy of language in a collection, I think, called What is this called some branch or some specialty of philosophy. This time is What is this called philosophy of language in Routledge 2024. And of course, he published a very good book about naturalism and its challenges in Routledge in 2024 with an Iranian, I think, researcher or professor is Ali Hussein Khani. And you have a work with him in progress, we can say, about Wittgenstein. We are waiting for this great book in two parts. And the title of the book is Wittgenstein and Other Philosophers. And we are really waiting for this book because we want to know how you will introduce Wittgenstein. And we know how much Wittgenstein is important, not only in the contemporary philosophy of language and mind, but in comparison to Quine. We said that Wittgenstein and Quine, they have a lot of common, but they had a lot of differences. So we will see with your book how the way and in which way you will introduce to us Wittgenstein, as you are a specialist of Quine's philosophy. So today, Gary Kemp will talk about we call the opposition, I don't know, the opposition, but the problem of the relativism and absolutism. It's a new problem of philosophy. So the title of his talk will be Quine on Relativism versus Absolutism. So later, after listening to Gary Kemp, we will have the opportunity to ask him some questions and to have a short discussion.
Okay, I'll begin.
Yes.
My destination is not by any means new, but I wish to get there by a new or newish path. I wish to reconsider Quine's famous thesis of ontological relativity. This is by no means the most famous thesis in Quine. Perhaps the related indeterminacy of translation is more famous. And these two have different statuses in Quine's thought, as can be guessed but from the names themselves. The first pertains to the relativity of claims involving reference. They're still factual, as in the relativity of space doesn't imply that there are no spatial facts, of course. Whereas the second pertains to the emptiness, the indeterminacy, as he called it, of certain claims involving meaning. The indeterminacy cannot be resolved by invoking further parameters. Whereas the first recognizes certain facts, even if the facts are relative. The second denies that there are really any such facts. Both were subject to further elaboration and qualification, but in broad shape, the difference in status remains the same in Quine's estimations from 1960s until the end of his life in the year 2000. So my subject is ontological relativity in its own right. For a long time, I went along with Quine on this, but now I'm not so sure. I want to make the case decidedly from within Quine's general philosophical point of view, what he calls naturalism, downplaying the relativity of ontology and upplaying absolutism. Again, I've made this case before, but I want to try it from a different angle. I won't have time to go further into Quine's famous naturalism, but more or less for these purposes, it can be understood as the denial of extra scientific facts. So it tends against metaphysics as, on the one hand, as developed by Kripke and other people in the 1960s and 70s, and also against first-person phenomenology. So first, I'll distinguish a third thing called the underdetermination of theory. So by the Greek letter phi, let us understand our science. This is insane idealization, but it will save space to assume disagreements to be resolved and that there is a sharp distinction between scientific claims and non-scientific claims. So phi will take the form of sentences in a first-order quantificational language and will include most, if not all, of what is actually asserted in mathematics, physics, chemistry, and so on. The sum total of evidence for phi will be E. So E for Quine is a certain set of accepted sentence. Disjoint from phi, call them observation categoricals. E can have false statements among them, so long as an observation categorical. The form of an observation categorical is just whenever O sub 1, O sub 2. So where O sub 1 and O sub 2 are the famous observation sentences, which is just as fire present, smoke present, it's raining, and so on. So for example, whenever smoke present, fire is present. So observation categoricals, not observation sentences, are known as standing sentences. Sentences that are judged true eternally for all time. But of course, we may change our mind about them. So the point is that phi implies E. So the sum total of our theory implies a certain set of observation categoricals. But E does not imply phi. So a theory implies its evidence, but the evidence does not imply the theory. So indeed, Quine holds that in principle, phi could be replaced by a distinct theory, phi star, which equally implies E, but no observation categoricals beyond E. So phi and phi star would be distinct, and they are not, in fact, intertranslatable. Maybe they are and maybe they aren't, but in the practical sense, just the practical sense, there is no means is known of translating sentences from one into sentences of the other. So this is the global underdetermination of theory. Despite its being highly speculative, many, maybe most scientists go along with it, including, interestingly, Noam Chomsky. Okay. So underdetermination of theory is distinct from indeterminacy of translation and from ontological relativity. It's not itself meant to undermine claims about meaning. So since phi and phi star must be very different structurally in order to resist our efforts at translation from one to the other, they could and presumably will usher in distinct ontologies, different universes of discourse, different schemes of reference. Yet E must itself be understood, Quine believes, as not having an ontology. That's important. So, only quantificational structure is necessary for the invocation of reference. And the matter is subtle, but for our purposes, the logic necessary to represent E, the sum total of observation categoricals, can be thought of at most as truth functional. So it just consists of not and if then and see and etc. So no quantifiers are necessary for this. Quantifiers are necessary in order to bring in the theory. So now I'll talk about ontological relativity in particular. And I should say that although it might seem sort of abstruse, I just got into a little bit of technical stuff. The basic idea behind ontological relativity is actually rather simple. And the way out of it, in my view, is also rather simple. So Quine came to see the basic argument for ontological relativity as disarmingly simple. And indeed, the ideas of, also called ontological relativity, the inscrutability of reference, but it's the same thing, same idea. To get an idea of the basic argument, assume for simplicity that the realm of reference of phi, again, comprises only physical objects, that phi includes names such as, A, B, and C, and consider a true sentence like A is F or FA. It might be, that object is blue, for example. So by the cosmic complement of an object of phi, we mean the whole universe minus the object. So if the object is the Eiffel Tower, cosmic complement is the entire cosmos with the Eiffel Tower removed. So then the cosmic complement of A is the cosmic complement of an F is also true. So again, the cosmic complement of A is the cosmic complement of an F comes to the same thing as saying A is F. More complicated, but it's, you can see that it has to have the same truth value as FA. So for relational predicates, the reasoning is analogous, but it's more complex. So this is the manner in which we propose to read or interpret FA. As we might put it, the fact is the same, but the mode of description is different or spuriously different, we might say. So cosmic complement of is an example of what Quine calls a proxy function, which for our purposes is simply a one-to-one function, but not the identity function. So it's just a one-to-one function which takes the entire universe of the theory as its domain. So another proxy function is the unit set of. So take an object and take the unit set, which contains that object. The effect is to change the reference of every term without changing the truth value of any sentence. So the reasoning that I just went through was presented in Ontological Relativity in 1968 and Things and Their Place in Theories, 1980. Earlier in Words and Objects, he had noted in effect that, for example, rabbit here is affirmed in just the same conditions as temporal stage of a rabbit is here. That is crucial. That is crucial in that context, for it is the context of radical translation, the situation of a jungle linguist, as Quine calls such a translator, who is developing a translation manual from scratch of a previously unknown language. But I won't go into it further. Suffice it to say here that with corresponding adjustments, including the language of space and time and the apparatus of identity and individuation, translating, is the same as, and so on. It's possible without altering the truth values of sentences to represent a language as having terms not for rabbits, but as having terms for temporal stages of rabbits, and likewise for every physical object. But the argument by proxy functions that I've been through is much, much neater. And I believe that this is why the argument of word and object is not repeated after 1969. So Quine concludes that the question of the ontology of a theory, of its domain of reference, is not absolute, but relative. There's nothing wrong with saying by rabbit, I refer to rabbits, but another scientist, speaking a seemingly slightly different language, can with equal justification say, by rabbit, you refer to the proxies of rabbits. This is why Quine calls the position ontological relativity. I'll just quote you a bit of Quine. The relational doctrine of space. There is no absolute position or velocity. There are just the relations of coordinate systems to one another, and ultimately of things to one another. And I think that the parallel question regarding denotation calls for a parallel answer. The relational theory of what the objects of theories are. What it makes sense to say is not what the objects of a theories are, absolutely speaking, but how one theory of objects is interpretable or reinterpretable in terms of another. But, and end of quote. So again, one can stay within a language and saying, by rabbit, I refer to rabbits. And to say that the buck must stop is to point out that the alternative is to plunge off into an infinite regress, to plunge into incoherence. One must simply accept this, that any specification of reference is subject to reinterpretation. Of course, in practice, the buck is considered to have stopped when distinguishing between objects within a single language, when using the language, as we always do, or by trivially translating the language, what he calls homophonically, where S is just translated as S. But such things do not erase the relativity of reference. So it's almost impossible not to think that there must be something missing here. I don't mean the cosmic complement of a rabbit or a rabbit stage. By rabbit, I mean rabbit, you know. But one must remember that Quine is using the term reference in a strictly scientific sense. What matters is not this passing show that occurs on one's inner mental screen when using the familiar term, not what's in one's mind when using it, but the objective evidence before one, which, as we have just seen, cannot choose between a reference scheme and its proxy equivalent alternatives. The object of a theory, as we have just seen Quine putting it, it seems, cannot be specified absolutely. It can be specified only relative to the choice of translation scheme. Which again, there is a sort of, final translation scheme where, you just accept a scheme. Nor is it impossible to distinguish rabbits from rabbit stages, or from complements of rabbits, or from penguins, pencils, or pens, for that matter. Within a single language, we just distinguish them in the normal fashion. For different sentences are true of penguins and from the ones true of pencils. It's only when we contemplate alternative reference schemes that the question arises. So Quine says of a proxy change, observation sentences would retain their old sensory associations. There is a rabbit would still carry its fluffy, hopping connotations. That's what happens in your brain. What would change is the denotation of the term rabbit within the sentence. The sentence retains its sensory associations, but what gets construed as an indirect or deferred reference to something else, the rabbit's proxy. So again, it's natural to resist this, to think that the power to refer to a particular object is something that manifests itself in one's mind at a particular moment. Indeed, it is a paradigm of a mental act, comparable to an act of will. Intuitively, reference is like a mental ray, linking one's word to an object. But not only is such a picture inadequate, we refer to unperceivable entities such as numbers or bacteria and stars in distant galaxies. It is simply not Quine's subject. What we might call, proto-reference is indeed studied by psychologists. They study macaques who manifest awareness of objects' persistence, of an object's persisting unseen. But we must remember Quine's naturalism, his scientific outlook on the facts of language. For Quine, these psychological facts are logically insufficient for full-blooded linguistic reference. They're not needed. Linguistic reference comes in only with the attribution of quantification, and crucially, with facility with the language of space and time. So only, this is a bit of hand waving. Only then can sufficient criteria of individuation and identity be posited. So the macaques, they don't have enough, going on in what they're doing to attribute them with, individuation of that particular object. So a favorite thought experiment runs as follows. Suppose I'm a student studying Quine, and I set about devising a proxy theoretic version of English. So, for example, quote, "My cat is hungry," unquote, is interpreted as, quote, "the proxy of my cat is the proxy of a hungry thing. Or the unit set of my cat is a unit set of a hungry thing. So I try speaking in that way. But despite my best efforts of my explaining about proxy functions and so on, most people, not being linguists or philosophers, they can't get it. But wait, I've hit upon a clever stratagem. When I want to say something about the proxy of my cat, I shall say my cat. Similarly with is hungry. So I've invented a variant of English. On the outside, no one will know. I'll seem a normal English-speaking person. But I secretly interpret the words in a proxy way. I might even forget about this momentary attack of proxyitis, I might think. Well, what this shows is the powerless of these inner gymnastics of the supposed existence of magic deferring rays. What matters, it seems, for the scientific description of reference is the fact that the set of rabbits and the set of objects capable of serving as the proxies of rabbits have a certain number, a certain cardinality. Given that the set has one, those objects can serve as the reference of rabbit. I should say, what matters for this scientific description of reference is all that stuff and linguistic behavior. Okay, so now I'm going to argue against that, against relativism for absolutism. And I hope that I will not stray from Quine's overall naturalism. So one might take the further lesson. One might take the further lesson as one of structuralism, that all that matters is the cardinality of the universe, not the particular things that make it up. Indeed, Quine invokes the lesson of Paul Benasarev, now extended from numbers to all objects. And if I'm not mistaken, this is unwarranted. Both pre-proxy and post-proxy, the set of rabbits exists. Similarly, for any other set of objects, either they exist or the proxies of the objects exist, in which case they still exist. They have to in order for the proxy function to be well formed. They have to exist. It's a so proxy function is like any normal function. It's a function from one set of objects to another set. So both set of objects have to exist for the proxy function to exist. Suppose we have a certain global or overall theory, which with objects, O sub 1, blah, 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 O sub n, and so on. T includes geometry, terms for physical objects, and so on. We construct a proxy interpretation of T star of T, so that where T had O sub k, T star has the proxy of O sub k. Again, take proxies to be cosmic complements. Now, the proxies are already in the universe of T. Talking of the proxies of elements of T is something we can do within T. Likewise, the objects of which T star treats of, are the proxies of objects which are within the universe of T star. So the rabbit in the universe is referred to as a rabbit, but so is a cosmic complement of the rabbit. The whole 4D universe minus a rabbit-shaped hole. All that changes is which is going to be called rabbit. No ontological difference between the theories as wholes. It just scrambles up the references of particular terms. So yes, the ontology of smaller scale theories is relative. But global ontology is not. And global ontology is the thing we're basically interested in. I mean, for these purposes anyway. The situation does change when we consider reducing the ontology rather than considering alternative interpretations by proxy. Suppose we have a theory that includes sets and also natural numbers considered as primitive. Then Hamdi announces, hey, we can eliminate the primitive numbers since we can get the effective of them just with sets, just by taking 0 as the empty set, 1 as a uniset of 0, 2 as a uniset of 1, and so on. Thus, we reproduce our theory of the universe, but now with a shrunken ontology. But now some sentences do shift from true to false or from false to true. So this is not, strictly speaking, an illustration of ontological relativity. It's just ontological reduction. So what I've said has nothing to do with, doesn't have any effect on ontological reduction. So what I want to say is that Quine does not establish that ontology is relative. And perhaps he did see this by 1981. For the total universe remains constant as we consider different interpretations by proxy. Indeed, it goes violently against his naturalism, to suppose we are considering different overall ontologies when considering proxy functions. What point of view would this involve? It'd be like Adrian Moore refers to a rogue Nerathian sailor. He makes certain pronouncements without any point of view. The same thing. I mean, would this involve a universe of non-existing objects? Well, that's not very Quinean. Possible non-existing objects? Definitely not Quine. There are, in Quine's view, no such objects. What he shows is not anything about ontology, at least not global ontology. What he shows is something about the status of reference, scientific reference, as understood by Carnap, Gödel, and Tarski, whose nature is exhausted by its use in formal theories. Again, it's natural to think that there is something more to reference, the magic rays, but I feel it's a great strength of Quine's philosophy to have shown that this is untenable. There are only dispositions with respect to observation sentences, plus added constraints in standing sentences, and this falls far short of justifying the magic rays conception. So magic rays conception is it's a normal conception. It's common sense. But what we're talking about is the concept of reference as used by serious science. So he says, all description of reality must come rather from within one's theory of the world. It's incoherent otherwise. Quine, I think, can be understood as showing that the explanation for many of the things we want to say about language are not themselves explanatory in the way that many philosophers take them to be, but they have a basis either in individual biology or in the pragmatics of language use. It's exactly like Hume and causation. Hume could see nothing in the objects that answered to the ordinary or philosophical ideas of power or necessity. But he saw a way to explain our tendency to ascribe those notions to objects. We expect, constant conjunctions to continue, like Pavlov's dog, and we lazily ascribe a queer power to the objects. Well, Quine did the same, although in a more complicated way with analyticity, as we would see if I were talking about analyticity, and more appositely with reference. The explanation for why we so naturally think that there's a queer relation between words and objects, like magic rays connecting, quote, rabbit, unquote, to rabbits, one that rules out cosmic complements of rabbits, undetached rabbit parts, and more wildly numbers, is simply that rabbit is the word we're accustomed to, that we've grown up with, that you're disposed to have certain mental events in connection with the world. The translation of you as talking about those other things would be to just a translation of you as talking about those other things would do just as much justice to the facts as the normal translation, but it would be abnormal, unfamiliar. So no wonder a straight-laced Davidsonian scheme, for example, Donald Davidson, will feel welcome, like home. But it isn't because it's somehow better at getting the facts right. Quine then can describe the facts without varnishing them in terms of the nervous system. Thinking about whether to say one more thing about. Shall I go on, or Hamdi?
Yes, it's okay. Yeah. Yes, of course.
Okay.
About 10 minutes or even 15.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
10 minutes. Just a little bit about the indeterminate future. Once one is freed of the sense that reference is determined by use, there is little point in maintaining that, nevertheless, one's meaning or concepts are determined by use. Indeed, if we assume with Frege that meaning or sense plus the context determines reference, to find reference to be inscrutable is ipso facto to find a similar conclusion as regards sense or meaning by modus tollens. So I think Quine presents a case that the facts relevant to meaning can be represented in various incompatible ways, but it isn't really important. What matters for human understanding of language is structures plus dispositions to use observation sentences. Okay, so a little bit about the centrality of the earlier Quine. According to Peter Hilton, who's taught me, according to his reading of Quine, my language, as I'm speaking, seeking it is for me bedrock, despite the fact that it is variously translatable into a given target language, including itself. Despite the fact that from a certain point of view, the meaning of what I'm saying is indeterminate. Speaking as I do, meaning and understanding as I do, is simply in the best sense a naturalist can muster of the notions of meaning and understanding, is simply a matter of my doing as I do, of my exhibiting certain behavioral regularities that accord more or less with those of others, of my having a system of linguistic dispositions that significantly overlap those of my community, not of my interpreting or translating anything. Questions of interpretation, including proxy considerations, presuppose that the linguistic dispositions in which understanding is embodied and the behavior which constitutes communication are up and running. So when pressed, what is shown is not the very idea of understanding or communication is, a fraud, but that the collection of dispositions which constitutes competence with the language do not add up to what we may have theoretically thought. From a strict scientific point of view, translation is indeterminate and reference inscrutable. Conclusions would put the kibosh on the idea that propositions are the real content of sentences, and that reference in a substantial or extra disquisitional sense has much to do with understanding or communication, but they don't undermine understanding of or communication. So long as we think of understanding, communication, or even meaning as just having the dispositions, the use dispositions that we have. So it's not. So Quine was on board with Wittgenstein's comment that there must be a way of being competent with language, which is not an interpretation. And this, I see Quine as agreeing wholeheartedly with Wittgenstein. Implicit in this is a simple argument that understanding or linguistic competence cannot be translation or interpretation on pain of vicious regress. If to understand S, I had to translate it or interpret it as another possibly homophonic sentence S star, then for it to be of any use to me, I must understand S star. But if to understand a sentence is to translate it as a further sentence, say S star star, and so on, ad absurdum. Therefore, there must be such a thing as understanding, which is neither translation or interpretation. Understanding one's language must be direct. And I take it that this is just a way of putting Wittgenstein's point. So Quine's paradigm-shaking views on translation does not affect the underlying view of what it is to meaningfully speak a language. This is not to say that there is a privileged view on meaning of reference to which indeterminate arguments do not apply, namely the first-person view. Is to say merely that, as Quine puts it, acquiescing in our mother tongue and taking its words at face value is compatible with translational indeterminacy and ontological relativity. So to acquiesce is not to translate or interpret one's words, it's simply to use one's language. This jives with the classical Quine on ontology. Quine in 1948 straightforwardly contends that the proper aim of the ontological enterprise is to answer the most general scientific question: what is there? This aim was reiterated with some vehemence on on Carnap's view of ontology when he said that ontological questions are simply the most general questions of existence. That, quote, the question of the ontological commitments of a theory is the question of what, according to the theory, there is. And further, that ontological questions then end up as questions on par with natural science. Then again, even in Word and Object, he compares the existential claims of the special sciences, what distinguishes the ontological philosopher's concern is, and all this is only breadth of categories. So the theory, the statements we dignify with the appellation ontological are just the most general statements of existence asserted within science, typically categorical, to use older terminology, such as there are physical objects, or rather than the narrower statements of existence, such as there are black swans. So as far as I can see, Quine doesn't take any of this back. He thinks that there's nothing categorically special or distinctive about ontological claims. They're absolute. Okay, that's it.
Thank you very much, Gary, for this talk and for all the points you was raising in this presentation, of course, of central ideas, Quine's ideas in ontology, and concern or regarding this problematic of relativism and absolutism, and which is a very, very important problematic. Of course, I will see if some of my students have some maybe questions to ask you. Okay, is there any questions?
I should say that parliamentary question is quite welcome.
Hamdi?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Hamdi. Thank you very much, Dr. Gary Kemp, for this very interesting conference. I am interested in metaphors, and I understand metaphor as an absolute value that we borrow from a certain realm to apprehend the concept or an object that belongs to another realm. I can give you some examples. When we understand time as a fortune, when we understand, for example, discussion as a war, are they considered from the point of view of Quine as absolute metaphors, for example? This is my question, and thank you very much.
That's a good question. Quine has some thoughts about metaphors. He even wrote about it. I can't remember what the title of the paper is, but I can't remember what he actually says. But one thing is that he thinks that metaphors should be expunged from the sort of rigorous statements of science. But a lot of talk, even among scientists, of course, is not rigorous, and a lot of times we can't get around certain metaphors. It's inescapable. And also, like war, or rather, discussion is war. For example, sometimes. Which ways